A night of drama awaits. Peter Smith is in Edinburgh for some of it. Peter, what are you hearing? What do you make of what you've heard so far? What do you make of the exit poll? What is the reaction there?
Well, that's a lot to take in there, Tom, but if we're talking about a night of significant change across the UK, well, what's happening in Scotland is the end of a decade of SNP dominance, and that change cannot be understated. 17 years in government, as Nicola Sturgeon in your studio has mentioned, and as they say, 10 years of completely dominating the elections, both the general elections and the Scottish Parliament elections. And tonight we're looking at the Labour Party in Scotland coming from relative wilderness. Let's not forget they had just won one seat at the last general election here in Scotland, and they could be on course if this exit poll is to be believed to have a majority in Scotland. I would say that there's some people here who are a bit sceptical about this exit poll and the accuracy of it in Scotland, especially as Jane mentioned, there are so many marginals, about a quarter of the seats in Scotland, a quarter of those 57 seats, that the pollsters regarded as just too close to call. We're talking about a difference of a few hundred votes could make a big change in who actually claims many of those seats. But what we're talking about now is that something significant is happening when the SNP are telling me that they're not entirely sure they're going to hold on to Dundee Central. That was their safest seat in Scotland. That would require a swing of more than 16% for Labour to take it. That gives you some indication of just how seismic this change is. I also think it's interesting to note that this was a different election here in Scotland. Yes, it was about the future of the NHS, it's about housing, it's about child poverty, about the cost of living crisis. But it was the SNP who decided to put independence front and centre of their election campaign. Page 1, line 1 of their manifesto. The architect of putting independence front and centre of this general election campaign is in our studio tonight, Nicola Sturgeon. She was the one who said that this would be a de facto referendum on independence to give the people of Scotland the opportunity to have their say on Scotland's future in the UK, because that was an opportunity that was being denied when Prime Minister after Prime Minister said no to a second independence referendum. This general election was supposed to be that de facto referendum. Now, since Nicola Sturgeon left as party leader and First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf and now John Swinney as the SNP leaders that have taken over have kind of downgraded that a little bit. But the clear message in the SNP manifesto in this election, as I say on page 1, line 1, front and centre, a vote for the SNP is a vote for independence. John Swinney told me a vote for the SNP is a vote for independence, and he told me as well a vote for any other party risks damaging the independence cause going forward. Stephen Flynn, the SNP's leader at Westminster, told me in an interview independence is on the ballot paper. Now, I'm being told by some of the people here tonight, some of the SNP staffers who are saying, well, this was about change at Westminster, we've been caught up in this election about kicking out the Tories. But the SNP set the terms. These were their terms. This was also about independence in Scotland, and if this exit poll is to be believed, the people of Scotland have had their say, and perhaps the message is that independence for them is not a priority right now. That's going to be something that's going to be carrying into the next election, because what's crucial, Tom, is that although Prime Ministers have ignored the SNP and said, no, now is not the time, now is not the time, Nicola Sturgeon was on the receiving end of a few of those messages back from starting with Theresa May after the Brexit vote, and there was a huge clamour to have another vote in Scotland. But what I think is important to remember is that if the SNP had won a majority on these terms that were crystal clear that a vote for the SNP is a vote for independence, it would have been extremely hard for Keir Starmer to shrug that off. It would have been a thorn in his side for the next 5 years. He would have to address it, have to acknowledge it, that the people of Scotland had an opportunity to have their say, and they would have backed that message. The people of Scotland had that opportunity, and it does not look like they have backed that. It's now going to be much, much easier for Prime Minister Keir Starmer to ignore any future calls. The SNP will say they still have a mandate for a second independence referendum going back to 2021, that Holyrood vote. The pro-independence parties have a majority at Holyrood. But it's going to look pretty weak when we're seeing such a heavy defeat when they put independence front and centre of their campaign in this election. And what I would say, Tom, is that there will be people who are watching ITV tonight who might have previously watched other channels, because they're keen to hear from Nicola Sturgeon on this, with independence front and centre, to say she was the architect of putting it so prominently on this election campaign. They've been wanting to know what her analysis is, what next for not just the SNP, but next for the independence cause. What does it mean for the independence cause? And perhaps to see if there might be a mea culpa or two in that assessment.
OK, Peter, thank you very much. That feels like...
I think Peter's getting a wee
OK, yeah. OK, no. Simple question: was it a mistake? I mean, you were clearly the architect of it. You had a frustrating time. You made clear that if you won the Scottish parliamentary elections, that you would consider that a mandate for independence. You didn't get any joy, and you were in a frustrating corner. But it was your decision to continue to put it front and centre. Was it a mistake, and do you accept that this is the cause off the agenda now for perhaps at least 5 years?
No, I don't, and I think that's a foolish conclusion for opposition parties to reach, but I'll come back to that in a second. I think Peter's analysis is not unexpected there. I've got a feeling he's had that pent up within him for quite some time.
He's an old sparring partner of yours.
He's an old sparring partner, yeah. Look, I think one of the questions out of the SNP result tonight is whether they've kind of left themselves between two stools on the independence question, because I think, in my view, it wasn't really put front and centre. Having it on the line 1, page 1 of the manifesto gave that impression and allows journalists like Peter to make the point. It was there, it was the big issue, and people have cast the verdict on that. But it was never followed through on in a sort of day-to-day basis in the campaign. We didn't hear day after day after day SNP spokespeople make the case for why, independence was an answer to the big issues at the heart of the election campaign, cost of living, Brexit, etc. So we've kind of fallen between two stools.
But don't you dig yourself into an ever bigger hole if you keep saying independence is the answer, and no one's going to give you a referendum, and there's nothing you can do about it?
Well, I mean, that's a massive challenge for democracy in Scotland, and that, if it continues to be the case that, and I'll come back to the question: does this set the independence cause back? If the SNP, has a reversal of the scale that the exit poll is suggesting, of course that will be a conclusion. But a lot of the people, if not the majority of people, who in this election have shifted from the SNP to Labour, they still believe in independence. They haven't shifted their opinion on independence. So it might take the issue off of the immediate sort of agenda for Keir Starmer, but it would be, I think, foolish to suggest that the independence question has gone away